Okay, so imagine you are the White House Chief of Staff, the person closest to the president, the gatekeeper who controls access and information flow, and you sit down for a series of interviews with Vanity Fair and proceed to say the president has an alcoholic's personality, that he is named in the Epstein files, that the vice president is a conspiracy theorist, that the budget director is a right-wing absolute zealot, that you were initially aghast at the Elon Musk USAID shutdown, that you tried to talk Trump out of disastrous tariffs, but failed, and that you were outvoted on limiting January 6th pardons. Those aren't leaked comments. Those aren't hot mic moments. Those are on-the-record statements to one of the most widely read political magazines in America. And the person saying them is Susie Wiles, daughter of NFL legend Pat Summerall, veteran Republican operative, the woman who salvaged Trump's 2016 Florida campaign and ran his entire political operation leading to his 2024 victory. The woman Trump chose as his chief of staff, his closest advisor, the person he supposedly trusts more than anyone. And she just torched significant portions of his administration in what reads like an exit interview, even though she claims she is not leaving. Now, after the article's published, Wiles did damage control on social media, saying significant context was disregarded and much of what she said about the team. And President was left out, that Vanity Fair painted an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative. But notice what she didn't say. She didn't say she was misquoted. She didn't say any specific statements were wrong or taken out of context. She said context was disregarded and positive things were left out. That is not a denial. That is someone upset about how her words sound when published, but not claiming they're inaccurate. And the White House response from Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was careful too. Praised Wiles as loyal and effective, but didn't trash the story or call it false. That tells you these quotes are real, and they're causing enormous internal problems. So today I want to break down the most explosive revelations from these interviews. What each statement reveals about dysfunction inside Trump's White House. Why Wiles would say these things on the record, and whether this signals she is preparing to leave. What the alcoholic's personality comment means, and why she tied it to her own childhood. The Epstein files revelation, and whether Trump being named but not implicated matters politically, and what this tells us about how decisions actually get made in this administration. When the chief of staff admits she gets outvoted regularly, because by the end you are going to understand this isn't just palace intrigue or gossip. This is the most senior staffer in the White House, admitting on the record that she disagrees with major decisions, that she thinks key players are problematic, and that she has been unable to constrain Trump's worst impulses. That is not how chiefs of staff usually talk, and the fact that she is talking this way now suggests something fundamental has broken inside Trump's operation. Let's start with the most psychologically revealing comment, because it tells you how Wiles understands Trump and manages him. She said Trump operates with, quote, an alcoholic's personality, with a view that there is nothing he can't do. Nothing, zero, nothing. And she connected that to her own experience growing up with an alcoholic father, Pat Summerall, the famous NFL player and broadcaster who struggled with alcohol for much of his life. Now, Trump famously doesn't drink alcohol. His older brother Fred died from alcoholism-related issues, and Trump vowed never to drink. So Wiles isn't saying Trump is an alcoholic. She is saying he has the personality traits associated with alcoholism: grandiosity, belief in unlimited capabilities, resistance to being told no, inability to acknowledge limitations. And she is saying she has been effective managing him because she grew up learning how to manage someone with those traits. Think about what that reveals. The president's own chief of staff is comparing managing him to managing an alcoholic, using childhood coping mechanisms from dealing with her father's addiction to navigate Trump's personality. Now, in one sense, this shows Wiles' self-awareness and honesty. She is not pretending Trump is easy to work with, or that traditional management approaches work. She is saying you need specific psychological strategies to manage him effectively, and her childhood gave her those skills. But in another sense, this is devastating. The chief of staff is publicly stating the president has dysfunctional personality traits that require special handling, that normal processes don't work with him, that you need experience managing addiction-related behaviors to deal with him successfully. Whether that is true or not, saying it on the record to Vanity Fair is extraordinary. No chief of staff talks about their president this way, publicly. You might think it privately, you might say it to close confidants, but you don't say it to journalists for publication. So why did Wiles say it? Possible explanations. 1. She is burned out and doesn't care anymore about maintaining the facade. 2. She is preparing to leave, and this is her exit interview establishing distance from Trump's decisions. 3. She genuinely thought this would humanize Trump and explain her effectiveness, but misjudged how it would sound. Or 4. She is so exhausted from 11 months of managing Trump that her filter failed and she said things she normally wouldn't. Whatever the reason, the comment reveals tensions that go beyond policy disagreements. This is about fundamental personality dynamics and whether Trump is manageable at all by anyone using normal White House processes. Wiles is essentially saying he is not, that you need unconventional psychological approaches, and that even with those approaches, you still get outvoted on major decisions you think are wrong. That is not a picture of a functional White House. That is a picture of managed chaos, where the chief of staff uses learned behaviors from childhood trauma to cope with a president who operates outside normal constraints. And the fact that Wiles felt comfortable saying this publicly suggests she has either reached a breaking point or has been given permission by Trump to be honest in ways that create distance from controversial decisions. Now let's catalog the specific policy areas where Wiles admitted disagreement or failure, because this shows how decisions actually get made in Trump's White House. First, January 6th pardons. Wiles told Vanity Fair she discouraged Trump from granting clemency to the most violent supporters who attacked the Capitol. But he did it anyway. She said she sort of got on board with the pardons, but also admitted there have been times she has been outvoted on things. That is remarkable phrasing. The chief of staff doesn't get outvoted. The chief of staff runs the process, controls information flow, and typically has enormous influence over presidential decisions. If Wiles is being outvoted regularly, it means Trump is either ignoring her advice or listening to other advisors over her recommendations. Either way, it suggests her influence is limited despite her title and proximity. Second, Liberation Day tariffs. Wiles admitted she and others tried to talk Trump out of his disastrous Liberation Day tariffs, but failed, and the outcome has been more painful than I expected. That is the chief of staff, on the record, calling the president's signature economic policy disastrous and saying she actively opposed it. Not that she had concerns or thought implementation could be improved. That she and others tried to stop it entirely and failed, and that the results have been worse than even her pessimistic expectations. That is not loyal staff defending controversial decisions. That is someone publicly distancing herself from policy she thinks damaged the country and her own credibility. Third, USAID shutdown. Wiles said she was initially aghast at Elon Musk shuttering the U.S. Agency for International Development, a decision that may have caused hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide from preventable diseases. She explained Musk was already into implementing the shutdown before others knew about it, that he probably did it that way because he knew it would be horrifying to others, and that it is not the way she would have done it. Again, not defending the decision or explaining why it was right, saying it was horrifying that Musk deliberately bypassed normal process, and that Trump doesn't know the details of these smallish agencies, so wasn't equipped to evaluate Musk's recommendation. That is damning. The chief of staff is saying a major policy decision that affected millions of lives happened because Musk moved fast. Trump didn't understand the implications, and people like Wiles who did understand were bypassed. Fourth, Justice Department retribution campaign. Wiles said she hoped the revenge tour against Trump's political enemies would last only 90 days. But DOJ has continued pushing charges, unsuccessfully, against figures like James Comey and Letitia James. When asked if it looks vindictive, she said, quote, "I mean, people could think it does look vindictive. I can't tell you why you shouldn't think that. That is not even attempting to defend the policy. That is conceding. It looks exactly like what critics say it is, and admitting she has no good explanation for why it is justified. These aren't small disagreements about tactics. These are fundamental objections to major administration priorities, where Wiles either opposed them and lost, or went along reluctantly, while maintaining private doubts she is now making public. Now let's talk about what Wiles said about other key figures, because commenting on colleagues this way violates every rule of White House discipline. About Elon Musk, she said he is an avowed ketamine user and an odd duck who was difficult to deal with as head of the made-up Department of Government Efficiency in the early days. Calling DOGE a made-up department is technically accurate since it is not a real government agency, but saying it that way diminishes Musk's role and signals she doesn't take it seriously. Calling him an odd duck isn't professional assessment. It is personal criticism, and highlighting his ketamine use, even though Musk has publicly acknowledged it, is clearly meant to raise questions about his judgment and fitness. Musk has denied being on drugs during his White House work, but the fact that the Chief of Staff felt compelled to mention his ketamine use at all tells you it has been a concern internally. About Vice President J.D. Vance, Wiles said he has been a conspiracy theorist for a decade, and his conversion to being pro-Trump came when he was running for the Ohio Senate seat, describing it as, quote, sort of political, rather than genuine. That is the Chief of Staff calling the Vice President a conspiracy theorist, and saying his support for Trump is insincere and opportunistic. Whether that is true or not, you don't say that publicly about the Vice President while serving as Chief of Staff, unless you've given up on maintaining team unity, or you've been authorized to create distance from Vance because Trump's considering replacing him. Either interpretation is damaging. About Budget Director Russ Vought, Wiles reportedly called him a right-wing absolute zealot. Vanity Fair says no context was given for that statement, and Vought responded by praising Wiles, suggesting he is not offended possibly because he agrees with the characterization. But again, the Chief of Staff doesn't publicly call cabinet-level officials zealots unless normal working relationships have broken down, or you are trying to establish that their policies are extreme, and you oppose them. And about Attorney General Pam Bondi, Wiles said she completely whiffed on the Epstein files by hyping a mythical client list and underestimating desire among Trump voters for new information. That is saying the Attorney General badly mishandled a sensitive issue and failed to read the political dynamics. These aren't gentle criticisms or constructive feedback. These are harsh public assessments that undermine the people Wiles is supposed to be coordinating with. Why would a Chief of Staff do this? Normal explanation is she is creating a record that establishes she disagreed with these people and their approaches, protecting her reputation for when things blow up or when she writes a memoir. Abnormal explanation is the White House has become so dysfunctional that normal rules about loyalty and discretion no longer apply, and everyone is operating independently, without coordination. Either way, a White House where the Chief of Staff is publicly criticizing the Vice President, key cabinet officials, and outside advisors is a White House in crisis. Now let's address the Epstein revelation, because this is going to dominate headlines, even though Wiles tried to minimize it. She confirmed Trump is named in the Justice Department files from the Epstein investigation, but said he is not implicated in anything awful. She described Trump and Epstein as, quote, sort of young single playboys together during a period that overlapped with Trump's relationship with Melania in the late 90s and early 2000s. So Trump's name is in there. His social connection to Epstein is documented. But according to Wiles, there is nothing that implicates him in Epstein's crimes. That is the best-case scenario for Trump politically, but it still confirms what his opponents have alleged, that he had a relationship with Epstein beyond casual acquaintance, that it is documented in official files, and that the association existed even after he met Melania, contradicting claims it was just brief, early contact. Now whether this matters politically depends on what specifically the files say. If it is just evidence of social events, parties attended, phone calls or meetings that don't involve anything illegal, then Wiles' characterization holds, and Trump can argue everyone in New York social circles knew Epstein before his crimes were fully understood. But if there are witness statements, testimony, or documents suggesting Trump knew about or witnessed concerning behavior, then being named in the files becomes much more problematic, even if Trump himself isn't accused of crimes. Wiles saying Bondi whiffed by hyping a client list suggests the files are less damaging than Trump's opponents hoped, but more relevant than the administration wanted to acknowledge. The admission that Trump is named at all means this story isn't going away, and Trump's team will have to manage ongoing questions about the nature and extent of his Epstein connection. So what happens next for Wiles and for the administration? Several possibilities. 1. Trump is furious about these interviews, and Wiles gets fired or forced to resign within weeks. The fact that the White House response praised her without defending her comments suggests they're trying to avoid escalating. But Trump historically doesn't tolerate staff who criticize him publicly, even if they also praise him. 2. Wiles stays but is sidelined, loses influence, becomes a figurehead chief of staff, while real decisions get made by others. 3. Trump actually appreciates the honesty and sees this as Wiles running interference, taking heat for unpopular decisions, while he maintains deniability. Or 4. This really is an exit interview, and Wiles is preparing to leave, having documented her objections to Trump's worst decisions while she still has platform and credibility. My guess is option 1 or 4. Chiefs of staff who talk like this about their presidents either get fired quickly or leave voluntarily shortly after. Staying in position with influence intact after saying Trump has an alcoholic's personality and calling administration officials zealots and conspiracy theorists, that seems unlikely. Which means Trump is about to cycle through yet another chief of staff, continuing the pattern of instability that defined his first term and apparently continues in his second. And that tells you more about Trump's management style than any interview ever could.